The bed was too stiff, the walls too beige, and the silence louder than any scream. I sat up, head pounding, the scent of bleach clinging to my skin. No photos, no calendar, no family. Just a plastic pitcher of water and a locked window. My name was on the door, but not my choice. They thought I wouldn't notice. They thought I'd fade quietly. They were wrong. Where in the world are you listening from? Subscribe now, because this isn't just a story. It's a reckoning. I used to wake up to the scent of lavender and wood polish, not bleach. Back then, the morning sun warmed my bedroom walls, casting lines across the curtains I'd stitched by hand. Now all I had was pale plastic and humming fluorescent lights. My name is Loretta Vaughn, 66, widowed, retired nurse, and apparently someone's burden. I met my husband Will during my 3rd year at County General. He had a voice like velvet and a way of making me laugh even during 12-hour shifts. We built our home on Oak Hill Drive, just a modest house, 1-floor porch swing out front. Nothing fancy, but it held us. Colby was born 2 years before Will passed. Our son, my everything. I poured myself into raising him. Skipped meals, skipped sleep, skimmed every dollar into his education fund. The house creaked when you walked past the hall closet. The kitchen faucet always squeaked if you turned it too hard, but it was mine. I kept it spotless. Scrubbed every tile with lemon vinegar until my fingers burned. And I never asked for anything in return. Not really, just to be remembered kindly. When Colby brought home Aubrey, I smiled. She was sweet on the surface. Hair curled, nails done, always smelled like magnolia and ambition. She said all the right things, called me Mama Loretta, brought candles I never lit, and vegan recipes I never liked. She rearranged my spice rack, started storing the heirloom china in plastic tubs, said it looked old-fashioned. I tried to welcome her, tried to adjust, but I felt the shift. Colby stopped calling me after work, stopped coming over to fix the porch light. They said they were busy, always busy, until I fainted that Tuesday morning, just fell to my knees in the kitchen, hands still holding the kettle. I woke up on the floor, cheek cold against the tile, and the smell of burnt toast filling the air. When Colby showed up that night, Aubrey in tow, I thought they were worried. "Mama, we just want to help," he said, voice syrupy. Aubrey handed me soup in a mason jar and rubbed my back. They asked about the deed, my will, my health insurance. Said they were just getting organized, in case of emergency. I didn't realize I was the emergency. That weekend, they came over again. This time with printouts. Retirement home brochures, just options. Aubrey smiled. Colby looked at the floor, hands in his pockets. I held the glossy paper like it was soaked in acid. Pinecrest, Sunny Meadows, Rest Haven. Each one more clinical than the last. "Look," Colby said gently, "it's not about pushing you away. It's about giving you rest." I blinked. Was my garden too much? My quilt pile by the sewing machine a threat? They spoke in circles, using words like support and transitional living, as if I was moving into a hotel with a view. But I knew what was coming. That night I couldn't sleep. The house creaked with every gust of autumn wind. Outside, dry leaves scraped across the porch. Inside, I stared at the ceiling fan spinning slowly, dust clinging to the blades. I thought of my wedding photos still hanging in the hallway, of Colby's baby shoes in the memory box under my bed, of the handwritten recipe cards from my mother. The home they wanted me to walk away from was the only place that still remembered who I used to be. I whispered into the dark, "I'm not ready to disappear." But no one answered. They told me to wear something nice, said we were going to brunch, just the 3 of us. Colby helped me down the porch steps like I was made of glass. Aubrey carried a tote bag too big for just a lunch date. The drive was quiet, too quiet. Colby fiddled with the radio. Aubrey checked her phone. I looked out the window. The trees lining Cypress Grove had started to turn gold. Bright leaves fluttered in the breeze, like little warnings I didn't yet understand. When the car turned off Main Street, I sat up straighter. "This isn't the way to Brooks Cafe," I said. "Oh," Aubrey smiled. "We made a last-minute change. Thought you'd like something more relaxing." The gates read Pinecrest Care Facility. My stomach sank. Colby parked in a visitor spot, turned the engine off, didn't look at me. "Mom," he began, "just hear us out." "No," I said quietly. But I still got out of the car, still followed them to the front desk, still signed the clipboard, hands trembling because my son asked me to. The receptionist smiled like I was checking into a spa. A nurse in lavender scrubs came to greet me. "You must be Ms. Vaughn. Let's get you settled." "I'm not staying," I said. She blinked, then looked at the clipboard again. Just a tour, Colby chimed in, but he was already walking away. He kissed my cheek. His lips were dry. Aubrey gave me a quick hug, the kind you give acquaintances. Cold, brief, hollow. "We'll be back soon," she said. And then they left. The door clicked behind them, final, sharp. The hallway smelled like plastic flowers and disinfectant. Too clean, too empty. They gave me a room key and a welcome packet. Inside the room, a single bed, a dresser, and a pale blue blanket folded with military precision. No family photos, no phone charger, no clue how long I was meant to stay. I stood in the center of the room, purse still slung over my shoulder. My knees wobbled. I sat down slowly, hands on my lap, breath shallow. They said it was brunch, but they had no intention of bringing me back home. That night I asked to use the phone. The nurse hesitated. "You can call during visiting hours tomorrow," she said, tucking the clipboard under her arm. "He just left," I replied. "My son, I need to speak with him." She offered a strained smile. "Let me check." 10 minutes later, she returned with a cordless phone and a furrowed brow. I dialed Colby's number. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again. And again. Then I called Aubrey. "This number is no longer accepting calls." I stared at the receiver, felt its plastic weight press into my palm like a verdict. The nurse cleared her throat. "There's something I should show you." She handed me a manila folder, inside a form. At the top, Pinecrest Residential Admission. My name, Colby's signature, boxes checked, observation, consent for treatment, extended stay. "You can't be serious," I whispered. He signed everything, she said softly. "Power of attorney's in place." "No," I said. My voice came out small, dry. "I never gave him that, never signed a thing." She shifted uncomfortably. "I'm just the shift nurse, Ms. Vaughn. But I can schedule a meeting with administration." I stopped listening. The air turned thin. The corners of the room felt too sharp. The bedspread too tight. The floor too smooth. I sat down, folded my hands in my lap, like I was in church, like I was at a funeral, because something had died. Trust, love, my place in my own life. The hallway echoed with soft wheels, distant beeps, a cough from down the corridor. Somewhere a TV played a cooking show on low volume, the sound of someone else's dinner. My dinner sat untouched on the tray, mashed potatoes and boiled carrots, gray and beige. I reached for the tray, then stopped. Instead, I opened the drawer, empty. I opened the closet, 2 hangers. No coat, no slippers, no memory of me at all. They hadn't packed anything, because they didn't plan on bringing me back. On the 3rd night, I asked the night nurse for a notebook. She looked surprised. "Can't sleep." "I like to journal," I lied. "Helps settle my nerves." She smiled. "I'll see what I can find." 15 minutes later, she returned with a thin spiral notebook and a blue pen with a dried-out cap. I waited until she left. Then I opened to the first page. Not to write poetry, not to pray. I wrote Bank of Ashfield, joint checking, 72290. Electric bill, still in my name. Deed, 324 Oak Hill Drive, no transfer recorded. Power of attorney, never signed. The ink scratched across the paper, rough and steady, like a knife on old bark. Every date, every call, every transaction I could remember. I wrote like a woman on trial, because I was. The only difference, no one knew I was still fighting. I hadn't spoken to Carmen Ellis in nearly 2 years. We used to swap recipes and legal tips over lunch at the clinic. She told me back then, "Loretta, always keep a copy. Don't trust family with your name unless you're ready to give it away." I didn't listen, but I didn't forget. I found the business card tucked deep in my wallet. Still smelled faintly of peppermint oil and ink. Ellis and Coleman, Family Law Estates Advocacy. Carmen's number scribbled on the back in her cursive loop. I dialed from the hallway payphone just before lights out. Straight to voicemail. "Carmen, this is Loretta Vaughn." Pause. "I believe my son committed fraud using my name. He placed me in a facility without consent. I still have access to joint accounts and legal ownership documents. I need you to call me back." Another pause. Then I added quieter, "I'm not dead, and I'm not done." I hung up. The hallway lights dimmed to half strength. Soft humming filled the corridor. The scent of stale coffee lingered in the air. I clutched the notebook to my chest. It felt warm, alive. I may have been parked in a room full of strangers, but I still knew my own name. And someone was about to remember it too. Carmen called back the next morning. "Loretta," her voice was sharp, focused. "You safe?" I looked around the pale blue room. The bed I didn't choose. The meals I didn't cook. The silence that didn't belong to me. As safe as I can be, I said. Given my only child signed me away. She exhaled hard. Tell me everything. I did. By Friday, she drove 3 hours through pouring rain to meet me in person. Carmen Ellis didn't walk into that place. She stormed in briefcase, clutched tight, fire in her heels. The nurses blinked. The manager blushed. The air changed. She pulled me aside, opened her file folder, and showed me what I already knew but needed to see: forgery. False POA, my signature in someone else's hand. You're not staying here another week, she said. And if they make us, she added with a smirk, we sue the hell out of them too. I nodded, didn't cry, didn't smile. Just breathed, deep and full for the first time in weeks. By Wednesday afternoon, I was free. No farewell hugs, no discharge party. Just a paper bag of clothes Carmen bought, and the sound of the Pinecrest doors clicking shut behind me. We didn't go back to Oak Hill Drive. Where do you want to go? She asked, pulling out onto the wet highway. Someplace with curtains, I said. That I picked. We checked into an extended stay suite just off the interstate. 2 rooms, a kitchenette, and peace. I stood at the window that evening, watching headlights smear across the rain-streaked glass. Carmen poured tea, waited. What's your plan? She asked. I looked down at the steam rising from my cup. Thought of Colby in my kitchen. Thought of Aubrey drinking wine on my porch. Thought of how they laughed as they erased me. I'm not going back there, I said. Carmen raised an eyebrow. I'm buying the house next door. She blinked. I continued, I don't want my keys back. I want them to see me every morning. And remember. Carmen laughed softly. Petty, she said. No, I replied. Biblical. The new house sat just 30 feet from the one I once called home. Red brick, white trim, a porch swing with peeling paint, and a rose bush out front that leaned too far to the left. It wasn't perfect, but neither was I. I stood in the driveway as the agent handed over the deed. The pen trembled slightly in my grip, not from fear, but from something deeper. A quiet storm inside my chest. Grief, resolve, and something else I hadn't felt in a while: power. Carmen stood beside me, arms crossed, sunglasses on. You sure you want to live this close? I didn't answer. I looked at the house next door, my old curtains still in the windows, my wind chimes still on the eave, but inside, strangers. Strangers who shared my blood. Strangers who smiled as they erased me. I remembered Colby as a child, sitting on the kitchen floor in that same house, stacking alphabet blocks and babbling nonsense. He once spelled mom backward and laughed like it was the cleverest thing in the world. And now, he spelled my name on legal documents. Wrong, sharp, final. I took a breath, lifted my chin. I don't want revenge, I whispered. I want proximity with consequences. Carmen said nothing. I signed the final paper. The house was mine. And for the first time in a long, long time, so was the silence. The first morning in the new house, I put on my best Sunday hat. It was navy blue, wide-brimmed, elegant. The kind of hat that says, I'm not hiding, I'm arriving. I brewed sweet tea just the way I liked it. Dark, bitter, no lemon. The porch chair creaked beneath me as I sat. And waited. Across the way, Colby stepped outside. He wore gym shorts, no shoes, hair mussed like he hadn't slept. He looked up, froze, saw me. I smiled, not wide, just enough. He turned back inside like he'd seen a ghost. Good. I wasn't haunting him, not yet. I was just reminding him I was still here. Every morning after that, I repeated the ritual. Same tea, same chair, same silence. Aubrey started drawing the curtains tighter. She parked on the far end of the driveway, like physical distance could undo moral decay. The neighbors began to notice. Mr. Lockwood, 3 doors down, waved for the first time in months. Miss Geraldine brought over banana bread and whispered, We heard what they did. You need anything sugar, you knock. I nodded. Didn't cry, just took the plate and placed it on my kitchen counter like a trophy. Some afternoons I'd see Colby pacing inside, hands on his hips, phone glued to his ear. Other days, no lights on until after sundown. They were unraveling, and I hadn't said a word. But the best part came one Thursday just before sunset. A figure stood near the edge of my yard, backpack slung low, shoes scuffed, hair too long for school dress code. Noah. He hesitated, then crossed the small path between our houses. Knocked once. I opened the screen door slow, didn't speak. Can I sit with you a while? He asked. My throat tightened. I stepped aside. We sat in silence for a minute. The kind of silence that doesn't demand conversation, just presence. I poured him a glass of tea. He sipped carefully. Mom says you're bitter, he said. I nodded. Dad says you're playing games. I said nothing. He looked out toward the fading sky, then turned to me. You don't seem crazy. I smiled. Thank you. He leaned forward, arms on knees. Why'd you buy this house? I paused, then answered slowly. Because your father needed a mirror. He snorted. That's cold. No, I replied. It's calculated. He looked at me for a long time. I missed your sweet potatoes. I'll make some next week. He smiled just a little, and in that moment, one look, one porch, one shared glass of tea, I knew. The storm was no longer just mine. By the end of that week, Carmen had filed the emergency motion, revoked the forged power of attorney, submitted a medical evaluation from Pinecrest's own doctor, stating I was mentally sound. Sharp as a tack, the man wrote. His only mistake telling me that too late. Within 3 days, we froze the joint account Colby had siphoned. Carmen's expression when she showed me the statement. Disgust. $7,212 in new purchases since the day they left me at Pinecrest. Designer luggage, patio furniture, a subscription wine box. Want to go nuclear? Carmen asked. I looked at her. No, I want to go surgical. She grinned. Even better. We didn't go back to the house I once scrubbed. We filed for partition. Since Colby was squatting in a home he didn't legally own, and I hadn't granted him tenancy, we had every right to sell. Paperwork landed at their door at 7:06 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday. The process server called Carmen laughing. Screaming, he said. She screamed like a kettle on full boil. He meant Aubrey, of course. Colby turned ghost white and slammed the door. That evening my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. I let it buzz once, twice, 3 times. Then answered. Mom. His voice sounded smaller, like it had shrunk under the weight of its own consequences. We got some kind of notice today. Is this real? Silence. You can't be serious. You're going to kick me out of my own house. I sipped tea. You mean the one you threw me out of? He stammered. That's not what happened. I cut him off. I never signed the POA. You forged my name. You locked me away. You took what wasn't yours. Mama, I was scared. I let the words settle. Scared. He wasn't scared when he changed the locks. Wasn't scared when he froze my accounts. He was scared now because someone was finally standing up to him. You have 30 days, I said. Pack your things. I hung up before he could respond. That night, Carmen and I toasted with sparkling cider and paper cups. We sat on my new porch and watched the sun dip behind the old rooftop. He'll appeal, she said. Let him, I replied. Etsons. 2 weeks later, the house sold to a young couple from Charleston, newlyweds. They loved the soul of it, the garden, the arched hallway. The place feels patient, the wife said. I smiled. It's ready for peace. The sale closed clean, every dime wired to me. And from that fund, I created the Vaughn Legacy Trust. One beneficiary, Noah. He didn't know yet, not fully. But one day when he turned 21, he'd own this house I now lived in. Every book, every spoon, every blooming rose. Until then, it was his safe place, and mine. That afternoon, I baked sweet potato casserole. Noah came over after school and set the table. We didn't talk about Colby. We didn't need to, because in this house, we didn't whisper around the truth. We served it hot, and with seconds. A week after the sale closed, a U-Haul pulled into the driveway across the street. I watched through the blinds as 2 men carried out furniture I once bought. The green velvet couch, the oak coffee table with the uneven leg Colby never fixed. Aubrey barked orders from the porch in a silk robe, hair wild, eyes sharp with fury. Colby followed behind silent arms, heavy with boxes. He didn't yell, didn't argue. He just moved. By sundown, they were gone. I stepped outside that evening. The air smelled like dust and the faint sweetness of leftover rain. Noah was already on the porch, sketchbook in his lap. She left, he said, without looking up. I nodded. She didn't say goodbye. She rarely does. He flipped a page. She took the good speakers. I laughed. Not a full laugh. Just enough to let the ache loosen a little. The next day I saw him. Colby, sitting on the steps, alone, beer in hand, shoulders sagging like someone had finally told him the truth, and it stuck. He didn't wave, didn't speak, just stared at the street, and maybe at himself too. Noah moved in the following week, officially. He brought his clothes, his books, a shoebox of old toys he wasn't ready to let go of. We cleared out the guest room together. He chose blue curtains, hung up photos of his friends, his bike, and surprisingly a photo of him and me from when he was 6. I don't hate him, you know, he said one night. I turned from the sink. I know. He just stopped listening. I dried my hands and placed one on his shoulder. That's how mistakes grow, in silence. Word of what happened spread through the neighborhood. Some whispered. Others nodded in quiet respect. At the church pantry, a deacon pulled me aside. We heard what they did to you, Miss Vaughn. Just know you didn't deserve it. I know, I replied, but I needed to prove it to myself too. Dotted. Carmen helped me set up the Vaughn Legacy Fund officially. It would serve women like me, women discarded, forgotten, or used. A safety net for those told they were no longer needed. I donated the first $50,000. No plaque, no speech. Just a signature and a quiet prayer. The next week I got a certified letter from Carmen. It was my will, finalized, notarized. Every asset named, every detail written in plain firm ink. Noah would inherit the house at 21. Until then, the trust would provide for him. Colby got nothing. But that. He called again. A blocked number. I almost didn't answer. Is this real? He asked, voice cracking. It is. You're cutting me out completely. No, I said. You did that. The moment you decided I was too much to carry. Silence. I said I was sorry. And I forgave you. But forgiveness, I said, doesn't come with a check. Then I hung up. Later that fall, Colby left town. No moving truck, no announcement, just gone. The neighbors said he moved to Florida. Someone else said he got laid off. I didn't care. Because the day he left, I sat on my porch, sweet tea in one hand, peace in the other. Noah sat beside me. He's gone, he said. I nodded. Sometimes people leave when the story's no longer theirs to control. He blinked. You think he'll come back? If he does, I said, he'll find a fence where the door used to be. We watched the sun slide down the horizon. The house across the street stayed dark. Empty. Hollow. Like all things built on lies. For 3 weeks, the house across the street stood still. No more garden parties. No scented candles wafting over the fence. No cackling laughter during wine nights. Curtains stayed drawn, even during daylight. The porch light never turned on again. And yet I never looked away. Every morning I sat with my tea, the newspaper unopened on my lap, watching, waiting. Sometimes I caught Colby standing in the kitchen, lit only by the fridge glow. Shoulders sagged, face hollow. Sometimes the TV flickered behind him, static cutting through the silence. Once I saw him take the trash out in a wrinkled shirt and mismatched socks, his movements slow, like grief in motion. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. He could feel me. Sexy. Aubrey came back once. Mid-morning. She pulled up in a rental car, slammed the door harder than needed. Marched inside, then back out 10 minutes later with a box of lotion bottles and a red suitcase. She stopped at the edge of the lawn, turned toward my porch, stared. I didn't blink. She raised a finger, not quite a wave, not quite a curse, then got in the car and drove off without looking back. No goodbye, no note, just the faint smell of her perfume clinging to the air like a lie that wouldn't settle. That evening, Noah and I baked cookies. He stirred too hard, splashing batter across the counter. I didn't mind. He licked the spoon and grinned. This house feels warmer, he said. It has room to breathe, I replied. He leaned against the counter. You think he regrets it? I paused. I think he regrets being caught. Later that night, I found him sitting on the porch steps, eyes tracing the stars. Do you ever wish it went differently? He asked. I didn't answer right away. I wish he had listened when it mattered, I said. But no, I don't wish to erase what came after. He looked confused. I pointed toward the roses along the fence. The best blooms need pruning. He nodded slowly. You're not just a grandma, he said. You're kinda a force. I laughed, full and free. I'll take that. And in the quiet between us, something bloomed. Not forgiveness, not forgetting. Just presence. And for once, that was enough. A year later, I stood at a podium in the community center. The folding chairs were filled with women, most of them with silver hair, tired eyes, and stories heavy in their bones. They didn't need inspiration. They needed confirmation. I gave them that. They will call you fragile, I said. They will call you forgettable, a burden, something to manage, something to move. I paused. But remember, this silence is not surrender. It is strategy. And peace isn't weakness. It's the evidence that you survived. They clapped, some with hands, some with hearts. One woman hugged me so tight afterward I could feel her history in her breath. Oatar. Back home, Noah was in the yard planting marigolds. His jeans were muddy, his smile bright. You speak good for an old lady, he teased. I wiped sweat from my forehead with the back of my wrist. I speak better because I've been quiet longer than most. We watered the garden together, side by side, root by root. Cert. That night I wrote one final line in the notebook I'd started at Pinecrest. They thought they buried me, but I was a seed. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? If you've ever been silenced, erased, or forgotten, drop your story in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe. We tell stories like this one every single day. Because sometimes, silence is the loudest justice of all.